Hello, welcome to Tuesday Tea with Elsa. And today we have Atlas over my left shoulder, and we have Zohari over my right shoulder. And they're here to have tea with me and all of you. So today I thought I would talk a little bit about alternatives to no. When horses say no to us, they display it with fight or flight. They either try and run away or they resist what we're asking them and push into it. So fight or flight are the physical manifestations of the horse saying, no, I can't do that, I won't do that. And this is a really interesting thing to me. I've spent my whole life trying to work around that no answer. And as I've talked about in previous tea time talks, there are some horses that do really well with clear boundaries where you say, no, that is unacceptable. And instantly their stress goes down and life is better for them. There is a phenomena where that is very comfortable for horses. But that's not the relationship I want to have with my horses. I want to have a different relationship, a more emotionally evolved, well-developed relationship with my horses. If I have a relationship where I have to set boundaries and say no all the time, it feels very childish. And so I have a funny story about this. My daughter turned 18 years old this week, and it feels like a huge milestone to me. My daughter is all grown up. But I was remembering when she was a baby, I actually banned the word no from the entire family's vocabulary. My parents weren't allowed to say no. My friends were not allowed to say no. Her dad was not allowed to say no. Nobody in the family was allowed to say no because I didn't want my daughter learning to say no to things. I wanted her to say yes to life. Now, totally backfired. No was still the very most important word to her when she learned to speak. And there's a really good reason for that. That word, when you say no, it makes everything stop. And I believe when horses say no to us, they say no because they feel overwhelmed. Too much. And so when they say no, they're saying, slow down. Whatever is happening in this situation is overwhelming for me and it's too much right now. So Zohari got his tail caught in the tree, but he's free. You doing okay, buddy? All right. So when horses say no to us, when they show us fight or flight, that horse is saying, I feel overwhelmed. It's too much. Whatever's happening is too much. Now, to relate back to the story of my daughter before she learned to speak, she learned to say no, even though I had schooled the whole family on always talking about what the options were, what we were going to do, never saying no. No was still very important because as a small child, she didn't have the vocabulary and the communication skills to talk about exactly what she needed. And so her best option was to say, no, too much, too soon, I'm feeling overwhelmed. And everybody knew how to listen to that. Everybody knew how to slow down, back off, and give her a little space when she said no. It wasn't what I wanted as a parent. I wanted to teach my child to say yes. And I feel the same way about the horses. I want to teach my horses to say yes. That is the emotionally developed response. When I present something, they may not be able to do exactly what I ask, but I want them to say, yes, this is what I can do for you. It might not be exactly what you asked, but it's what I'm capable of offering. Now, that's pretty emotionally mature. And a lot of horses who are not emotionally mature, they need a lot of boundaries and they're either saying no to you or you're saying no to them. It's a very childlike relationship. So yeah, respecting the no is huge, but we want to think about it a little bit, because if we really reinforce the no, we get stuck in a very juvenile relationship where it's very childlike and we don't really develop all of the nuances of a more adult relationship. So yeah, if we can replace no's with yeses, we start to have a more adult conversation and we can do more things together. But how do we do that? So one of the things that I do that I don't talk about a whole lot, and someone suggested I talk about it in tea time, is the nose to hand touch. When horses reach out with their nose, if you reach out with your hand and you end up touching nose to hand, there's a really beautiful moment there where everything slows down. And after that nose to hand touch, it's really easy to slide into something less pressured. If you can do this consistently, what it becomes is a replacement for saying no. When horses feel like they might need to go to fight or they might need to go to flight, if they can reach out with their nose and say, "Can I touch your hand?" and ask you to slow down, then they don't need to say no. They just say, "I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. Could we slow down a little bit so my brain and my emotions can catch up with what's happening?" And this is incredibly useful. I don't think you have to use the hand to nose touch. That's my particular variety. But I do think that in a relationship, you need to come up with some sort of communication between horse and human that says, "This situation is overwhelming for me. Can we slow down?" If the horse has some way to ask you to slow down, then they do not have to say no. No would be fight or flight. They can say, "Can you help me? I'm feeling overwhelmed." Yeah, exactly, Kevin, like the hot air balloon. I tell a story in my webinar about the bank account of relationship where a hot air balloon landed next to Myrna and I unexpectedly on a public trail. And she was able to touch in with me and say, "This is really overwhelming. Can you help me with it?" Instead of saying, "No, I can't be here with the hot air balloon. I have to run away or I have to fight you on this," she was able to reach out and say, "I'm having a hard time. Can you help me? Can we slow this down?" And so this is a part of horse training that we don't talk about very much, and that's what I do in tea time. I try and bring up this idea of expanding our theory around everything we do. There are going to be horses that really thrive on boundaries. They like it when you say no to them and you're clear. You change that no to a yes. That clarity of boundaries is going to really help your less mature horses. If they become more emotionally mature, you can start to add in a little more vocabulary, which is, "Can you help me when I feel overwhelmed so that I do not have to go to fight and I do not have to go to flight?" So I've been thinking about that a lot. I don't always get it right. You know, there's some situations that I'll put horses in and they do get overwhelmed and they are going to have to go to fight or flight. Maybe I have to use a halter to manage it. You certainly can't set every situation up for perfect success. But the more we develop whatever communication works for you, you and your horse get to figure out what works for you. If your horse can say, "Slow down, I'm feeling overwhelmed," it becomes the alternative to saying no. And no is when they've got to fight against you or they've got to run away. Now, I am not against tools. I think halters and ropes and bridles and all those things have their time and their place. But the reality is the halter, the rope, the pocket full of cookies, all of these things are motivators to help a horse decide to stay with you, to not go to fight and not go to flight. Now, my job in freedom-based training, when I take away all of those things that manage feelings of fight or flight, that motivate a horse not to go to fight or flight, is to instead work within their range of capability and develop a lot of skills and enjoyment in life so that they don't need to say no. Now, as a backup plan, we've got to give them some other language. If I don't want them to go to fight and I don't want them to go to flight, I don't have a halter to control it, I don't have a pocket full of cookies to talk them out of it, I need to make sure that we have a language where horses can reach out to me and say, I'm feeling overwhelmed. Can you help me feel better so that I don't have to say no to you? So those are my thoughts today. And I think that for all of you guys watching, it might be something for you to think about as you're spending time with your horses. When they don't act the way they're supposed to, when they get resistant or pushy or flighty or spooky, what are they saying no to? What are they overwhelmed by? And is there a moment before all that happens? Is there a place where, if they had the communication skills, could they reach out and say, this is hard for me, could you help me? So Vanessa, actually, I didn't talk about how I teach the hand to nose touch, so I'm glad you commented here, because I should probably go into that. I actually teach it in positive reinforcement. They would call it scan and capture, which means when it happens naturally, there's gonna be a time the horse reaches their nose out to you. And when it happens naturally, I make sure the next thing I do is particularly easy for the horse. I stand in their favorite place. I look at their favorite focus category. I do something that's particularly easy for the horse after the hand to nose touch. When you do that consistently, they realize it means things get easier after I touch my nose to her hand. And then it can become a request. If they feel like life is getting too overwhelming, too difficult, they can use that request. They can reach out and touch you and say, listen, do you think you could make this easier? Now, you don't have to use the hand to nose touch. I happen to like it. You really could come up with any signal you wanted, as long as you were consistent that the thing you always did after it was easier for the horse. Sky's the limit. You can choose any communication pattern you want. The point is, hi Zohari, he just nudged my arm. I think I'm sitting too close to his hay pile. So maybe this is an opportunity here. Let's see. Hey Zohari, what do you think? So he is nuzzling around in the hay, and he's going to come over here, and I'm messing with him and I'm playing with him and I'm doing stuff that isn't necessarily easy. Like, this could be overwhelming. He's 24. He's not particularly overwhelmed by it. He knows me really well. But at some point, he could say, hey, Elsa, let's see if I can catch this on the camera. And he may just push into his hay because, we've got a pretty casual, relaxed relationship. He doesn't really need me to make it easier because it's already pretty easy. But, come here. Now he's going to go somewhere else. All right, so let's see if we can get Atlas to demonstrate here. So Atlas, he's eating hay. Life is already pretty easy. He doesn't need it to be any easier. But I get kind of close. He's going to reach out, he's going to touch my hand, and I'm going to move away back to my tea drinking spot next to the tree, and I made his life easier. He's going to go back and eat hay. It's a really simple example. So, yeah, they do. Horses have lots of language, and we don't always know what that language is. We stumble in, we use our bodies any old which way, and the consistency with which you do things is how horses know that you know what things mean. So whatever the signal is that you decide The key is to be consistent with it. And as you could see, Zohari here, he didn't need anything to be easier. So he was happy to wrestle with me a little bit, let me pet his head, play with him. He didn't need to touch my hand. Nothing needed to be easier. Atlas here, when I got closer to him, he went, you know what? I wouldn't mind having you go back to that distance place where you were drinking tea earlier. So he was really quick to reach out and touch my hand and say, could you make this easier? I'd like to go back to eating my hay. You know, every horse is going to be a little bit different. And it's about, exactly, Kevin, it's about creating that shared language from scratch. You meet in the middle. This is the thing that I do when you do that. This is the thing that you do when I do this. And when we have consistency, it gets a lot easier to talk to them. And yeah, Sandra, I agree. Zohari was nudging my arm. He was asking me to move away, which I did. But, I would love him to actually look at me, reach out to me, touch me, not just say, hey, move, but say, hey, could you make my life easier? There we go. There's a little touch and a breath. So yes, you're right. When he moved his head away, when he moved away from me, he was saying no. It was a tiny little bit of flight. You're absolutely right. And that's the thing is that, hi, he just bumped into me again. That could be seen as a little bit of fight. It's not, because it's not going to increase. It's more of a playful gesture. And just as him pulling his head away could be yield, like he didn't really need to be part of that, but he's not running away. The difference between yield and flight is how well you get along with it, how much you still want to be with each other. The difference between fight and play is how much you still want to be together after it happens. So, there is a lot of gray area between yes and no that could be considered maybe. And that's where this conversation gets so interesting. That's where it's really fun. And so Logan, I'm gonna have to look at your comment a little bit later. When I'm doing these Facebook Lives, only part of it shows up, so I'll look at it later and answer it when I'm not live. But that gave you, some clumsy demonstration here with Zohari and Atlas, and some food for thought. Not everything's black and white. There's a lot of gray area in the middle, and if they get a really big fight or flight reaction, it's a big no. If they just kind of pulling their head away, it's maybe a small no. Or is it a yield? Are they just yielding from pressure? Lots of different ways to think about it. But if we can come back to the key point of the talk, which is, does your horse have some way to let you know they're feeling overwhelmed? Something is too much, too soon for them. Can they whisper that to you? Or do they have to yell with their fight or their flight? So I'm going to leave this talk here. I'm going to continue to hang out with my horses and drink my tea. And I hope you guys have a wonderful afternoon. And if you have anything you would like me to speak about next week or the week after, make sure and leave it in the comments or send me a message. I'm always happy to consider new topics. And yes, Sandra, that is how I would specify it. When they touch my hand, it's sort of, please no. Please don't do that, or please slow down. And that really works for me. That's a more mature conversation than just saying no. Oh, Florentine! Oh, that's so exciting! Chekhov has had a really long road to learning how to say yes to having his feet trimmed. And I'm so excited, Florentine, that today he was able to say yes and just be a normal horse. Congrats, Florentine and Chekhov. That's awesome. All right, wonderful. Thank you guys for joining me for tea, and have a wonderful day. And that's hello from Atlas and Zohari.